Siquijor holds a mystifying beauty of an island that is rich in nature, surrounded by the vast seas. Formerly called as Isla de Fuego by the Spaniards due to the hundreds of fireflies nesting in the forest, a part of this island literally glows at night, which can be seen from afar. It is popularly referred to as the Island of Healing, a tropical paradise for travelers and the like. But behind this mystical beauty lies a dark secret that would send chills to your spine. For a small piece of land enveloped in mystery, a very old practice of native occult lies in the shadows of the island of Siquijor. It doesn't matter if you believe or not in any form of mysticism, but I strongly advise you at least respect it. I just wish I had known it sooner before my brother and I went there, and then maybe our vacation to this gorgeous island didn't turn into an unforgiving, dreadful nightmare. As a couple of guys living up north, my brother Dustin and I always enjoyed visiting countries with a more pleasant climate. Traveling different places was our way of bonding. It was the only time that Dustin and I could set aside our usual concerns and just enjoy our time together. Our parents passed away early, and Dustin was the only family I had left. One of the places that we enjoyed traveling to was a small country known for its beaches and warm weather, Philippines. We have visited a few other locations before, like Boracay and Palawan, but we wanted to go somewhere more remote this time. As I searched online, we discovered this very small island province in the central part of the Philippines, known as Siquijor. The way that people described it, along with the pictures taken by a bunch of travelers, we knew that we had to see it for ourselves and experience what it had to offer firsthand, and so we decided to go. The island was so small that it only had one airport for small planes, which offered local flights. The cheapest and most common way to go there was by a boat. From the airport, we had to go to a different city, and there we headed to the port and rode the ferry. It was a very tiresome travel, but we thought it would be worth the effort. As we arrived in the port, I could already tell that we were about to have a great time. The bright sun was up, and I really appreciated the warm welcoming of the green and blue scenery. There wasn't that much people around since we went after the peak season, and I felt the calm and peaceful vibe of the place at the very moment that I set my foot on the ground. The sky was so bright and blue, and the water was so lively and clear. The soothing sounds of waves from the sea and the gentle brushing of the leaves really made me feel that we were in a relatively remote tropical paradise. The island was so small that it could be toured in a day, but you would need to have at least 3 active days to spend a good amount of time with what the island has to offer. The tricycles in the port even offered us a really good price for an all-around trip, but we preferred to rent a couple of scooters so we could freely roam the place ourselves and relax pace. This was our 3rd time in the Philippines, so we knew that renting scooters was the best way to go. After we decided where we would stay, we immediately started to head on the first thing that anyone would do when they go to these kinds of places: the beach. We started at the east side of the island where a popular beach resides. It was pretty close to where we were staying, and we could easily run on foot in less than 30 minutes if we wanted to, but that was why we rented scooters. We saw a few tourists there like ourselves, but most of the people were locals. This beach had diving platforms on the cliffs where you could jump down and splash into the pristine water. Needless to say, my brother and I went up to the highest one, which was said to be about 22 feet high. We experienced the thrill. After a couple of hours, we decided to move along and head to the falls not far from Salagung Beach. It was called the Cambugahay Falls, and we needed to trek a relatively steep path through the forest to get there. That small amount of effort was well worth it, The scenery alone was quite breathtaking. It was a picture-perfect view of what you would imagine if forest nymphs and tree elves would make a private pool. The falls were a series of short drops from a few levels with the water coming from the springs, creating this stunning lagoon of a turquoise natural pool surrounded by lush trees. The locals placed ropes on the upper level where you could swing from and drop into the water. We spent a good amount of time swinging from there. Dustin, being friendly and approachable, managed to be friends with a few locals and foreigners that we met. He was a free-spirited kind of guy, with a cheerful and adventurous attitude. People liked it. I've always been the shy one. My brother would often just start a random conversation with starters, and then drag me into it. After that, we decided to call it a day, and we headed back to where we were staying. The next morning, we decided to join the other tourists we met the previous day and roam the island. They knew more about the significant landmarks of the island than us, so tagging along with them seemed convenient. They led us to a few of the old structures, and most of them were churches that date back to the time of the Spaniards' colonialism. Most of these structures were still being used until today, and one in particular was even converted into a local school. After seeing the old structures, we headed on to another popular site on the island. It was a thick and stunning fig tree that was said to be a century old. This gnarly-looking tree is generally composed of thick roots and vines with its branches extensively stretched outwards. Its beautifully grotesque appearance was quite intriguing and mystifying, which was a perfect introduction to the other thing that this island is known for. The island is also known to be inhabited by old families of diviners and mystics, and just right around the tree was a number of stalls selling potions and charms. Surprisingly, a lot of outsiders were actually going to this place for this particular reason. The island was surrounded by different kinds of plants and various herbs, and the old practitioners of their native esoteric occult would use these things to create different potions and medicines. Dustin and I just looked around and silently giggled as we browsed the items, and one of the vendors enthusiastically offered us his love potion. He just joked around and said that he didn't need it, and the vendor just laughed with him, then offered other items instead. Dustin's laughter was starting to get louder, and I could notice that he was already getting some of the locals' attention. I tapped him on the back and just discreetly whispered that he should stop. Then I grabbed him and just slowly pulled him out of the crowd. We were about to walk away when one of our friends approached us. He was with a local girl that we also met when we visited the falls. After our brief hi and hello, I noticed the uneasiness on her expression, despite her cheerful smile. As we all slowly walked away from the stalls, she told us that these things were obviously fake, and were only meant to fuel the visitors' belief of mysticism by making them easily accessible, since Siquijor is known as a land of spiritual healing, even before it became a tourist destination. At the end of her explanation, she started sounding genuinely serious and warned us. She told us that this perception towards the locals of this island arose for a good reason. Due to its popularity, the number of fake healers and diviners increased. However, what we should avoid was to unconsciously offend the real ones. And what she told me after that statement bothered me a little bit. She said that just like how others could heal, some could also inflict incurable illnesses, and the witches of the island are infamous for casting the most gruesome of curses. The discussion about this matter went on as we walked around and had our lunch. I wasn't particularly sure if what she was saying was true, since she obviously believed them, but I was genuinely intrigued, and I thought that there might be something more to it. Dustin was also listening, but I could tell that he wasn't really interested. As the time passed, me and my brother grabbed our scooters and kept on going to different spots on the island on our own. We ended up spending a long time at a bar when the night finally came. The drinks were decently priced and the meals were really good, but the main reason we stayed there was the very laid-back countryside theme of the establishment. I had a few drinks and Dustin even had more, so we decided to go back to the place we were staying at. I was already a little tipsy, so I knew that Dustin must be feeling more intoxicated than myself, and I had confirmed it when his driving had gotten a bit wobbly. The road was incredibly dark, and we could hardly see. We were only depending on our headlights so we could see where we were going. Dustin was quite a bit ahead of me as he was singing the song that we last heard from the bar. We were both laughing, but I still kept on yelling at him to wait for me. Suddenly, the headlights on Dustin's scooter started to flicker. I told him that I should move ahead in front because there was something wrong with his light. But then it lit up steadily again, and he moved along. A few minutes later, his headlights flickered for a second time until it totally shut off. The next thing I knew, I heard a loud thump, and Dustin was thrown off of his scooter. He hit something, or rather, someone. My brother just stood up from his fall and just laughed it off, but the smile just wiped off of his face when he saw what he had struck. I quickly came to him as I noticed how the expression on his face suddenly changed. The front of Dustin's scooter had a deep dent with blood on it, and there were a few splashes of blood on his shirt and face as well. We looked at each other, terrified, as we both realized what had just happened. And as we looked around, we saw a young boy lying unconscious on the ground, his head covered in blood. I immediately checked the boy's pulse, and he was still alive at the time. I told Dustin to rush to the nearest house or anybody that he could see and ask for help as I watched over the poor kid. But unfortunately, medical services wasn't able to make it in time. The boy died as we were on our way to the hospital. Someone probably recognized the kid, and they were able to call his family. My brother and I just waited outside, feeling guilty and shocked. 3 people arrived a few moments later. Judging by their reactions, we knew that they were the child's parents. We didn't know how we would apologize for what we did, but we tried to say something anyway. Just before we were able to say anything, the parents just ran past us and went into the building. We could hear both of the parents crying, but the third person was left outside the hospital, just a few feet away from us. She had a different reaction. She was probably her grandmother. She was a very old lady, probably in her 80s, wearing a patched dress with a shawl around her neck. She was staring at us both with such contempt, especially at Dustin. She was staring at the stains of blood on his clothes. It was easy to tell that it was him who hit the boy because of it. We should have approached her and apologized as hard and sincere as we possibly could. But for some reason, my feet were locked on the ground and I couldn't move. I turned my head to Dustin, and I saw him trembling in fear. Before we could do or say anything, the old lady just turned his back and slowly walked away. We waited until morning for things to settle down. We then approached the parents and explained what happened as we sincerely apologized again and again. They told us that their son was a special child, and he wandered off on his own. They were looking for him as the incident happened. Somehow I felt that they realized it was an accident. We offered help and they accepted, and so we headed back to the place we were staying shortly after. Dustin didn't say a single word since we had left the hospital. I could see that he really felt bad and guilty for what had happened. I wanted to console him somehow, but I was really tired and I just practically passed out the moment my body touched the bed. A few hours later, I was awakened by the sound of moaning and whimpering. As I checked on my brother, his arms, legs, and face were full of rashes. I asked him what was wrong, and he said his body felt intolerably itchy. I asked him if he ate or did anything that could cause any allergic reaction, although I was aware that Dustin never had an allergy to anything. He wasn't able to sleep because of it. I could tell by the numerous scratches on his skin. He wasn't able to sleep because of it. He lifted off his shirt and I discovered that the rash was all over his body. We went back to the hospital to get him checked out, but they also couldn't figure out what it was, so they just gave him creams and antihistamines. We went back to the hotel so that he could have some rest. We asked for a new set of bedding, thinking that there might be some bed bugs that caused the rashes, and he went to bathe a number of times, and he refused to eat anything. We just spent the entire day in the room since we really couldn't do anything due to his condition. I thought that the meds worked since he calmed down somehow. I just decided to sleep the night away and hope that he'd be better the next day. But what happened next was the total opposite of what I had hoped for. When I checked Dustin on the following day, his body was filled with lacerations due to his non-stop scratching. His nails were already nicked and torn, and his rashes were turning to boils. He told me that it felt like something was crawling under his skin, and the itchiness was severely intolerable. Once again, we went to the hospital and he was immediately admitted when they saw his condition. After several hours of inspecting and tests, they still couldn't figure out what was happening to my brother. He was starting to groan harshly. He couldn't bear the unexplainable itchiness. He was already starting to behave like a madman, and so they had no choice but to sedate him. They even tied his hands on the bed so that he could no longer cause any more damage to his body. I didn't know what to do. I was totally clueless and useless. As I waited and hoped for a positive result or any solution for my brother's case, someone from the waiting area approached me. He asked what did my brother do. Now I responded quite aggressively and said that why would you assume that my brother did anything? The stranger looked straight into my eyes and confidently said that there was nothing that this hospital could do to help my brother. He claimed that my brother must have angered someone, and that someone was probably a witch that could perform an old curse that he referred to as Barang. As the stranger described to me what this horrible curse was, it had gotten less and less believable despite the similarities of what my brother was experiencing. But that was until we heard a scream of tremendous agony coming from Dustin's room. I immediately rushed to my brother to see what was wrong, and I couldn't believe what I saw. Just as what the stranger said, a number of black bugs came out as the doctor and nurses tried to extract his boils. At that point, I would believe in almost anything. I asked for the stranger's help since the doctors couldn't do nor explain anything. So we went to a spiritual healer in hopes of helping my poor brother. I could hardly recognize him. His body was almost completely covered with gashes and abscesses that every small movement he made was excruciating. The healer performed a very peculiar ritual that was known as bolo bolo. He dropped a black pebble on a clear glass cup filled with water, and then started blowing in it through a wooden straw as he walked around my brother. They said that if the water remained clear, then it meant that the person was clean. The water would then get murky if the person was experiencing any form of physical or spiritual troubles. Until the water gets clearer, the healer would just repeat the ritual again and again. But in my brother's case, it just reflected how bad the situation was. As he blew on the wooden straw and moved around Dustin, the water became black as mud. The expression of extreme shock on the healer's face said it all without a single word. He dropped the glass on the floor, and worms started to crawl out from it. As he turned his head to me, I knew that there was nothing he could do. A few minutes later, Dustin just fell flat on the floor like a lifeless puppet with its strings cut off. In the small of the opening of his mouth, the centipede started crawling out. And yet my brother didn't show any expression at all. His eyes were still open, but they had no reaction as worms started to slither out of it. My brother was dead. He was turned into nothing more but a shell filled with parasites. I dropped on my knees, horrified and in grief at the same time. Just a day after his passing, his body went into an advanced state of decay. I had no choice but to cremate him before I headed back home. The healer told me that whoever put a curse on my brother must have been really angry, and that anger manifested on the strength of the curse by the witch's will. He said that there were only a few remaining individuals who could do that, and no healer of the current time could possibly battle against it. They had a pretty good idea who that witch could be, but they were so frightened of her that they didn't even dare say her name. I couldn't blame him for fearing her. My brother was the only family I had, and he died right before me in such an impossible, abysmal way. There was nothing I could do but to witness the profound suffering that he went through.